Maggie always wanted a home. Ever since she was a little girl, she dreamed of having a place she could call her own, a sanctuary where she could build her life and create lasting memories. A place of her own, a cozy corner of the world where she could feel safe and secure, surrounded by warmth and love. She found it in Brookhaven, a charming community with tree-lined streets. The neighborhood seemed perfect with its picturesque scenery and friendly neighbors. The houses were quaint with welcoming porches. Each home had its own unique character, yet they all exuded a sense of belonging and community. Maggie felt a thrill as she signed the paperwork. The pen in her hand felt like a magic wand, transforming her dreams into reality with each stroke. Her dream was coming true. She held the keys to her new home with a smile that could light up the darkest night. But her joy was short-lived. The initial excitement began to fade as reality set in. The Brookhaven Homeowners Association, or HOA, had rules, lots of rules. They were more than just guidelines. They were strict mandates that every resident had to follow. Rules about paint colors, lawn ornaments, even mailbox placement. Every detail of her home and yard was subject to the HOA's approval. The HOA rulebook was thicker than a dictionary. It was overwhelming, filled with pages upon pages of regulations. Maggie felt a knot of unease in her stomach. The dream home she had longed for was starting to feel like a burden. Still, Maggie was determined to be a good resident. She wanted to make the best of her new situation and integrate into the community. She meticulously followed each rule. She wanted to prove that she could adapt and thrive in Brookhaven. She repainted her door twice to get the approved shade of blue. It was a painstaking process, but she was committed to compliance. She gave up her beloved wind chimes. The gentle music they made was a small joy she had to sacrifice. Maggie wanted to fit in, to belong. She craved the sense of community she had always envisioned, but the rules felt suffocating. The more she tried to conform, the more she felt trapped in a nightmare of regulations. The head of the HOA was Sandra, a woman who ruled Brookhaven with an iron fist. She patrolled the streets, clipboard in hand, a stern look etched on her face. Sandra seemed to delight in finding violations, no matter how small. One day, Sandra appeared at Maggie's door. Her lips were pursed, her eyes narrowed. Maggie had hung a bird feeder, attracting a symphony of birdsong each morning. Sandra declared it a violation. The bright colors were too distracting. Maggie felt a surge of anger. The bird feeder brought her joy. It was harmless. Why did the HOA have to control every aspect of their lives? That night, Maggie stared out at her quiet, sterile street. Brookhaven felt more like a prison than a haven. The incident with the bird feeder sparked something in Maggie. She started to notice the discontent simmering beneath the surface in Brookhaven. Neighbors whispered complaints about the HOA's overreach. They felt stifled, unable to express themselves. One afternoon, Maggie saw her neighbor, Mr. Garcia, sadly dismantling his granddaughter's lemonade stand. Sandra had declared it a violation of the commercial activity rule. Maggie had enough. She marched over, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous," Maggie exclaimed, her voice echoing in the quiet street. "It's a lemonade stand, not a corporation." Sandra glared at her, but Maggie stood her ground. A small crowd gathered, murmuring in agreement. The seeds of rebellion had been sown. Maggie decided to confront Sandra directly. She requested a meeting, her heart pounding as she entered Sandra's perfectly appointed living room. Sandra sat stiffly on her floral-patterned couch, her expression unwelcoming. "These rules are suffocating us," Maggie declared, her voice trembling slightly. "We're not robots, Sandra. We're individuals with our own tastes and desires." Sandra's eyes narrowed. "These rules are in place to maintain property values," she retorted. "But at what cost?" Maggie countered. "We're losing our sense of community, our individuality. Brookhaven is turning into a Stepford suburb." Sandra scoffed, but Maggie could see a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The meeting ended in a stalemate, but Maggie left feeling empowered. She had spoken truth to power. Maggie knew she couldn't fight this alone. The challenges posed by the HOA were too significant for one person to tackle. She realized that the strength of a community lies in its unity, and she was determined to harness that power. She needed to rally her neighbors. Maggie began by reaching out to those she knew best, her immediate neighbors. She explained her concerns and listened to theirs, finding common ground and shared frustrations. She started small, chatting with people during her morning walks, listening to their frustrations. These casual conversations soon turned into more serious discussions about the need for change. She organized a petition, collecting signatures to demand a review of the HOA rules. Maggie went door to door, explaining the importance of their collective voice and how it could bring about real change. To her surprise, support poured in. Neighbors who had been silent for years were now eager to contribute. They handed over signed petitions with a sense of hope and determination. People were eager to share their stories of how the HOA's rigid regulations had impacted their lives. They felt heard, validated. These shared experiences created a bond among the residents, a sense of solidarity that had been missing for so long. A sense of unity began to blossom in Brookhaven, a shared purpose that transcended the perfectly manicured lawns. The community was no longer just a collection of houses, it was becoming a network of support and friendship. Maggie organized meetings in her backyard, the scent of freshly baked cookies filling the air. These gatherings became a symbol of their collective effort, a place where ideas were exchanged and plans were made. Neighbors who once only exchanged polite waves now engaged in passionate discussions. They debated, brainstormed, and collaborated, each person bringing their unique perspective to the table. They drafted proposals for new, more flexible guidelines. These proposals aimed to balance the need for community standards with the desire for individual expression and freedom. Hope replaced the simmering discontent. Brookhaven was waking up. The community was no longer passive, it was active, engaged, and ready to shape its own future. The day of the town hall meeting arrived. The community center was packed, buzzing with nervous energy. Sandra sat at the head table, her expression grim. This was her domain, and she was not accustomed to challenges. Maggie took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. She spoke about the importance of community, of individuality, of freedom of expression. She presented the proposed changes to the HOA rules, emphasizing the need for balance and fairness. A heated debate ensued. Some residents, mostly older, expressed their support for the existing rules. They feared change, worried it would disrupt the order they cherished. But the majority spoke out in favor of Maggie's proposals. They shared their stories, their voices filled with emotion. The vote was close, but in the end, Maggie's side prevailed. A cheer erupted in the community center, a wave of relief and jubilation washing over the room. Sandra, her face pale, could only watch as her reign of control. It wasn't a complete overhaul, but it was a start. The new guidelines allowed for more flexibility, more personal expression. Residents could finally paint their doors without consulting a color chart and hang bird feeders without fear of reprisal. That night, Maggie sat on her porch, a warm breeze rustling the leaves of the now permitted flowering tree in her yard. The sounds of laughter and conversation drifted from her neighbors' homes. It felt alive. The battle for Brookhaven had been long and arduous, but it had taught Maggie a valuable lesson. There is strength in unity. By coming together, by raising their voices, they had achieved what seemed impossible. Maggie realized that true community wasn't about conformity, it was about embracing their differences, celebrating their individuality. It was about supporting each other, fighting for what was right, even when it was difficult. She had discovered a strength within herself she never knew she possessed. A strength that came from standing up for what she believed in, from fighting for her community, and in the process she had found her voice, her purpose. The changes in Brookhaven were immediate and profound. What was once a quiet, almost forgotten suburb had transformed into a vibrant and lively community. The streets, which used to be empty and silent, now buzzed with activity and life. Colourful flowers bloomed in once barren yards. Gardens that had been neglected for years were now bursting with colour and fragrance, a testament to the renewed spirit of the residents. Children's laughter filled the streets as they played freely, no longer restricted by arbitrary rules. The sight of kids riding their bicycles, playing tag, and simply enjoying their childhood was a heartwarming change. The air buzzed with a newfound sense of community. Neighbours who had barely known each other before were now chatting in their front yards, sharing stories and building connections that would last a lifetime. Brookhaven was no longer a picture-perfect facade. It had become a place where real people lived real lives with all the messiness and beauty that entails. It was a real community with all its imperfections and quirks. And it was beautiful. The diversity of the residents added to the richness of the community, making it a place where everyone felt they belonged. Maggie looked around at the smiling faces of her neighbours, their laughter echoing in the twilight, and felt a profound sense of peace. She knew that this was the result of their collective efforts, their determination to create a better place for themselves and their families. They had fought for their right to be themselves, and they had won. The celebrations were not just about their victory, but about the journey they had undertaken together. And in doing so, they had created something truly special. A community built on respect, understanding, and a shared love for their little corner of the world. It was a place where differences were celebrated and everyone had a voice, a community where everyone finally felt at home. Brookhaven had become more than just a place to live. It had become a place to thrive, a place where dreams were nurtured and friendships flourished,